My name is Caleb Morgan. I am 30 years old, and 3 weeks before my mother's birthday, my father told me not to come home. You'd embarrass the whole family. If you insist, don't call me your son. I stood in my kitchen with a mug of cold coffee, the fridge humming like a dare, and opened my banking app. 2 years of quiet autopay's power. Water. Internet blinked back at me. One by one. I hit cancel. The apartment felt louder, like the world had finally cleared its throat. But what they didn't know was what happens when the lights actually go out. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Because what happened after I pressed cancel wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was the spark that set everything else on fire: bills unpaid, relatives whispering, a birthday party in the dark, and a truth none of them were ready to face. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, in a two-story house with chipped white paint and a front porch that sagged just a little on the left side. When I think back, I remember the creak of the wooden steps under my sneakers, the way the screen door always slammed too loud, and the faint smell of coffee and cigarette smoke that hung in the kitchen. That was home, or at least, that's what we called it. From the beginning, my sister Lydia was the star. She was only 3 years older, but you'd think the entire world had been designed to orbit around her. At family dinners, she'd sit in the middle seat, my mom piling extra helpings onto her plate, while Dad asked about her grades, her friends, her plans for the weekend. I'd sit there too, my fork clinking against the plate, waiting for someone to ask me about my day. Usually, no one did. One night stands out clear as glass. I was 12. Lydia was 15. Mom had made spaghetti. I remember the steam rising off the sauce, the sharp tang of garlic in the air. I'd spent the entire week building a wooden birdhouse for shop class, proud of the fact that the nails actually lined up for once. When Dad finally turned toward me, I straightened in my chair, waiting for a chance to share. But before I could open my mouth, Lydia announced she'd been picked to sing at a school assembly. Just like that, all attention swung to her. Dad slapped the table with pride. That's my girl. My words stuck in my throat. I set down my fork, twirled the noodles half-heartedly, and swallowed everything I wanted to say. I didn't know it back then, but that silence would matter later. Holidays were no different. One Christmas, the living room glowed with string lights, and the pine tree Mom had insisted on keeping despite Dad's grumbling about the needles. Lydia tore into a big box wrapped in shiny red paper, pulling out a brand new leather jacket. She squealed, threw it over her shoulders, spun in front of the mirror. I opened my own box. Smaller, lighter. Inside was a pair of socks and a grocery gift card. Mom smiled like it was thoughtful, like she'd really considered me. We thought you could use something practical. I nodded, forced a smile, but inside the gap carved a little deeper. In high school, I wasn't failing. I wasn't brilliant either. I was steady. The kind of kid teachers called reliable. I bagged groceries after school, the conveyor belt rattling with boxes of cereal and gallons of milk, just so I could stash away a few dollars. Lydia, meanwhile, got a part-time job at the local boutique, but somehow always had cash for dresses, shoes, the kind of things that turned heads at dances. Once, I handed Mom an envelope with my paycheck inside, just $120. I thought it might help cover bills. Weeks later, I saw Lydia twirling in a satin dress, her curls bouncing under the kitchen light. Mom beamed. She deserves to look nice for prom. My chest tightened. My money had gone there. I said nothing, just smiled when Lydia asked if I thought the color suited her. Years later, when I was in college, my phone buzzed late one night. It was Mom. Her voice was small, trembling. Caleb, the power company sent a shut-off notice. We're behind on the bill. Could you help? Just this once I worked 2 jobs back then. Tutoring math during the day and delivering pizzas at night. My fingers smelled of grease. My shoes were worn through. But I transferred the money anyway. The next week, Dad bragged at a barbecue that he'd handled it, that no matter how bad things got, he always pulled through. I stood a few feet away, sipping soda from a paper cup, biting the inside of my cheek until it bled. I didn't know it then, but that small transfer would set the pattern for the next decade. After graduation, I moved west to Tacoma. Lydia stayed closer to home, chasing opportunities that always seemed to appear just when she needed them. I co-founded Everline Systems with 2 college friends. The office was nothing fancy, just a garage with concrete floors, second-hand desks, and humming servers that ran too hot in summer. But slowly, contracts came in. We built something solid. My parents never asked much about it. They'd nod politely when I said renewable energy and then change the subject. To them, I was the son who tinkered with wires. Lydia, meanwhile, landed an administrative job at a law firm. Dad couldn't stop bragging. Our Lydia's working with attorneys. You know, important people. He'd puff his chest like her success rubbed off on him. My own achievements, a shrug at best. Then came the auto pays. It started almost casually. Mom called one afternoon. Voice warm. Sugar-coated. Honey, costs are getting harder on our retirement. Just until things even out. Could you cover the utilities? We'll figure it out soon. I agreed, thinking it'd be temporary. But months rolled into years. Every first of the month, nearly $400 slipped quietly out of my account. Electricity, water, internet. No one ever acknowledged it. Not a card. Not a thank you. Not even a passing comment. Lydia never chipped in. Whenever I asked, Mom's excuses flowed like a well-rehearsed script. She's dealing with other expenses. She'll help next time. I stopped asking. I remember one Thanksgiving during those years. The table groaned under turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce. The house smelled of roasted herbs. Laughter rising from the living room, where Lydia held court with relatives. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email. Notification. Your payment to Spokane Utilities has been processed. I slid it away without a word. Across the table, Dad raised a toast to Lydia, praising her latest promotion. My chest felt tight. My mouth dry despite the wine. I swallowed it down. Same as always. Looking back, I see how those payments hollowed me out piece by piece. Not the money itself, but the silence around it. As if I didn't exist. As if I were just an invisible hand that kept the lights on while the family pretended someone else was responsible. I didn't know it then. But that invisible role would one day become my weapon. By the time I hit 28, the pattern was so ingrained, I barely thought about it anymore. The bills went out like clockwork. My parents never mentioned them. And Lydia still wore the crown as the family's pride. But every now and then, something small would shake me, like a splinter under the skin that wouldn't heal. One summer evening, I drove back to Spokane for a family barbecue. The air smelled of charcoal and lighter fluid, and kids from the neighborhood darted across the lawn with sparklers. I walked up the driveway carrying a 6-pack of local craft beer, thinking maybe this year things would feel different. Inside, laughter echoed from the dining room. Lydia stood at the center, holding a glass of wine, recounting a story about her firm's latest case. Relatives leaned in, hanging on her every word. Dad spotted me at the doorway, gave a curt nod, then turned back to beam at her. I sat down quietly at the edge of the couch, the beer still sweating in my hand. No one asked about my work, not even a passing house Tacoma. It was as though I'd walked in as a guest, not a son. Later that night, as we cleared dishes, Aunt Ruth cornered me in the kitchen. She was the only one who ever saw through the performance. She glanced toward the dining room, then leaned close. You're the one keeping the lights on, aren't you? I froze. My eyes flicked to hers. She'd said it so casually, like she already knew the answer. I didn't confirm, but I didn't deny it either. She just patted my arm, muttering, "They'll regret it one day." Her words echoed in my chest long after the party ended. Another memory presses itself against me whenever I think of those years. A snowstorm in Spokane must have been winter 2019. The whole neighborhood was blanketed in white. Plows struggling to keep up. I got a frantic call from Mom. The heating bill had slipped through unpaid. The power company threatening to cut service. I was already strapped, living off energy bar lunches while trying to keep Everline afloat. But that night, I transferred the money anyway. I imagined them sitting in that warm living room, fire crackling, while outside the storm howled against the windows. I pictured them safe because of me. And then I remembered how, the very next week, Dad told relatives over dinner how resourceful he'd been to keep the house running through the storm. My name never came up. I swallowed the sting like always. There were birthdays too. I can still see Lydia's 30th. Balloons lined the walls. A banner stretched across the living room. Cake thick with buttercream frosting. Dad made a toast, tears in his eyes, calling her his greatest accomplishment. My chest ached, but I clapped along, raised my glass. Not one person noticed I'd spent the afternoon fixing their Wi-Fi router so the music playlist would run without interruption. When the night ended, I slipped back to my car in the driveway, snow crunching under my boots, the cold air sharper than the ache in my ribs. I didn't know it then, but every one of those moments was shaping me, teaching me, hardening me. Meanwhile, in Tacoma, my life looked completely different. Everline Systems had grown from that hot garage into a real office space with glass walls and humming servers cooled by professional units. My partners and I had secured contracts with mid-sized firms, even landed a feature in a local business magazine. On paper, I was finally successful. But every time I drove back to Spokane, none of it mattered. In that house, I was still the invisible son. 2 years before everything collapsed. I sat across from Mom at a diner on the outskirts of Spokane. The neon sign buzzed faintly overhead, flickering in and out, and the smell of burnt coffee clung to the air. She stirred her cup slowly, then said in that same soft tone I'd heard all my life, "If you could keep covering the bills just a little longer, Caleb, it would mean so much." She didn't look me in the eye when she said it. I agreed, like always. But something about the way the waitress refilled my mug, the way Aunt Ruth's words still echoed in my memory, made me pause. I wondered, even then, if my silence had made me complicit. As months blurred together, the withdrawals stacked up in my account, $389. 50 here. Sibai Ling Arme Yuan. 75 there. The total crept toward $10. Lin Lin Lin. Each transaction, a quiet reminder that I was useful but not valued. One night, I sat alone in my apartment in Tacoma, scrolling through family photos on an old hard drive. Lydia smiling in cap and gown while Dad's arm wrapped around her shoulders. Lydia blowing out birthday candles while Mom leaned in to kiss her cheek. In nearly every frame, I was off to the side, blurry, half-hidden, or missing altogether. It was like I'd been erased in real time. Long before I ever decided to walk away, I leaned back, eyes burning, and whispered to myself, "One day, this will matter." I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I felt it in my bones. When Dad's voice cut through the phone 3 weeks before Mom's birthday, when he told me not to come home, when he said I'd embarrass the family, it wasn't just a single wound. It was every wound stacked on top of another. Every silence, every dismissal, every bill, every erased photograph. It all collapsed into that one moment. And that's why, when I opened my banking app and started canceling those autopays, my hands didn't shake. My breath didn't hitch. I simply tapped, one by one, until each lifeline was severed. It was the first time in 30 years that I wasn't swallowing my hurt. I was setting it free. And though my apartment was silent that night, the echo of my father's words followed me into sleep. You'd embarrass the whole family. If you insist on coming, don't call me your son. I didn't know it then. But those words were the spark. The silence I'd carried all my life was about to become the loudest answer I could ever give. The night of Mom's birthday came like any other, except for the gnawing silence between us. I stayed in Tacoma, sitting at my desk with the blinds half closed. While in Spokane, the party kicked off. Photos started trickling onto social media balloons. A frosted cake. Lydia holding court as always. But then, just after Fem P.M., my phone buzzed. Power's been cut. The whole house is dark. It was a message from Mom. 2 minutes later, another please. Caleb, pay it now. I stared at the words on my screen. My reflection in the glass window looked foreign. Harder. I didn't reply. I'd already canceled those payments weeks ago. The same night, Dad told me to stay away. Not long after, more messages poured in. Dad's tone was sharp. No water. We can't cook. Handle it now. Lydia's voice followed. Internet's down. Guests are arriving. Please fix this. Urgent. I set the phone face down. The silence in my apartment hummed louder than their desperation. For the first time, they weren't calling me out of love or pride. They were calling because they'd lost the sun-shaped utility they relied on. By 6, the relatives had arrived in Spokane, and the floodgates opened. My phone lit up with angry texts. You embarrassed your mother in front of everyone. What kind of son lets this happen, Melissa? Was right you never think of anyone but yourself. The names blurred together, uncles, cousins, neighbors, each one piling on, defending the family image, like it was sacred scripture. I scrolled through. Expression blank. They thought silence meant weakness. They didn't realize silence could also be a blade. Then the call came from Aunt Ruth. She never reached out unless it mattered. Her video popped up on my screen. And for a moment I hesitated. But I answered. Her face filled the camera. Lines etched deep with worry. Behind her, the kitchen glowed with warm yellow light. I recognized the clink of forks. The muffled laughter of relatives trying to pretend nothing was wrong. You're not going to pay it, are you? She asked quietly. I exhaled. He told me not to come. I said, voice low. Said if I insisted, I shouldn't call him my father anymore. Ruth's eyes softened. But before she could reply, the chaos broke loose. Voices surged behind her. My mother's voice cracked through the noise. Tell him I'm ashamed. On this day of all days, Dad's voice followed. Booming. It's just a few bills. What kind of man gets petty over money? Lydia stormed into frame. Arms folded. Lips twisted in contempt. He even picked up the call. Mom's been crying all day. Does he even care I didn't move? I let their accusations hang. Let them stab the air. But I gave them nothing in return. Because sometimes the absence of defense speaks louder than shouting ever could. And then came the twist. A face appeared over Lydia's shoulder. Sharp-suited. Hair neatly combed. He glanced at me through the camera and froze. Then, cautiously, he spoke. Hey, boss. The room behind him stilled. Whispers crackling like static. I recognized him instantly. Ethan Clark. He joined Everline Systems only weeks earlier. Transferred from our southern branch. We'd exchanged emails. Even sat through 2 meetings. But here he was. Lydia's boyfriend. The same boyfriend my father had praised as a manager. Someone important. The silence on that call was heavier than any shout. My relatives stared at him. Then at Lydia. Then at me. Ethan straightened. Eyes darting. And finally said it out loud. In case you don't know, I work at Everline. Caleb is one of the co-founders. A glass clattered to the floor somewhere in the background. Lydia's face drained of color. I simply nodded once, lips pressed into a thin line. Then I spoke slowly, calmly. Hope your big introduction goes perfectly. And I ended the call. That was the first fracture. The moment the cracks began to spread through everything they'd built on appearances and favoritism. They wanted me invisible. But now, without me saying a word, the truth had carved itself into their celebration. The morning after that chaotic video call, I woke before dawn. Steam curled up from the coffee mug on my desk while the inbox filled with the usual flood of updates. And then one name caught my eye, Ethan Clark. His email subject line was simple apologies. I opened it, scanning the line slowly. I didn't know you were Lydia's brother. I've always respected you at the company. I didn't expect her to be like that. I'll be ending this relationship. Thank you for not putting me on the spot before everyone. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just clarity. The image of Lydia's shocked face still lingered in my mind. But what struck me more was this truth had a way of surfacing without me ever needing to lift it up. I typed a reply, that's your decision. Ethan, think carefully. I don't bring family into the workplace. Then I hit send. No explanation. No lecture. By mid-morning, Lydia's name flashed on my phone. I let it ring out. A few minutes later, her message arrived. I'm sorry. I didn't think Hudson would change like that. You're his boss. If you said something, he'd listen. Please talk to him. Ask him to come back. I read it twice. The desperation bled through every word. But what struck me was her assumption that I still existed only as a lever she could pull. I texted back. He didn't leave because of me. He left because of how you treat people. Then I slid the phone into my pocket and returned to work. Later that week, a different knock came. Not on my inbox. On my front door. I opened it to see my parents standing there, suitcases at their feet. The flight from Spokane had carved new lines into their faces. They looked smaller than I remembered. I let them in. We sat in my living room, the air heavy with unspoken history. Dad spoke first, his voice quieter than usual. We may have gone too far. Things shouldn't have gotten like this. Mom added quickly, her hands folded tightly. We've thought it over. Maybe we made mistakes. For a moment, I let myself believe this was real. But then the pivot came. Dad leaned forward, voice firmer. We're family. Caleb. Family helps each other. We raised you. Sent you to school. A part of everything you have comes from us. Mom chimed in, tone soft. Practiced. If you could send us about $2,000 a month. It's not much for someone like you. The air turned brittle. They hadn't come for reconciliation. They had come to attach a price tag to their apology. I gave a small laugh. Not cruel. Just hollow. Then I asked, what about Lydia? How much will she contribute each month? The silence stretched. Dad glanced at Mom. And she finally spoke. Your sister's job is unstable. The breakup with Ethan has been hard on her. Same old story. Same shield. So I leaned forward, voice low and steady. If she agrees to $2,000, I'll match it. No more. No less. Or if you expect me to cover the full amount, I'll need it in writing. A legal agreement. When you both pass. The house in Spokane comes to me. The words hung like smoke. Then Dad exploded. He shot up from the chair, slamming his palm against the table so hard the teacup toppled. His roar filled the room. You're setting conditions for your own parents. We raised you 20 years. And now you nickel and dime us. I didn't flinch. I stood slowly, my voice almost a whisper but cutting through his rage. I think you should leave my house. Mom gasped softly. Dad's face burned red. But they said nothing more. Just the dragging scrape of luggage wheels across my hardwood floor. The door clicked shut. And the silence that followed was deeper than anything their shouting had ever left behind. That was the second fracture. The night of the birthday had been the first. This moment was the final cut. the one that made clear we weren't family in the way they wanted to believe. The night of my mother's birthday sits in my memory like a scar, sharp edges, impossible to smooth over. I wasn't there in person, but I lived it through the fragments that reached me, the messages, the calls, the video that connected me to the chaos. At 4:57 p.m., my phone buzzed. Mom's text lit the screen. The power's been cut. The house is dark. Please pay the bill. A few minutes later, another message. Dad this time. Short and cold. No water. We can't cook. Handle it now. Then Lydia's. Frantic, internet's down. Guests arriving. Fix this. Urgent. I remember looking at the clock. 5:12 p.m. The exact moment it clicked for me, the autopay cancellations had timed out to perfection. Not planned for this specific day. But when you cancel after years of paying, it only takes one cycle for the silence to arrive. And it did. Right when they needed it most. By the time the relatives gathered in Spokane, the house sat in blackout. Candles lit the dining table. But the air buzzed with irritation. The awkward shuffle of guests trying to mask their discomfort. Someone whispered about how embarrassing it was. Another asked why Lydia's tech genius brother couldn't keep the lights on. Then came Aunt Ruth's call. I almost didn't answer. But something in my gut told me to pick up. Her face filled the screen. Warm light from the kitchen behind her. But the sound was chaos, clattering dishes, raised voices, fragments of complaint. She looked at me. Her eyes sad but steady. You're not going to pay it, Caleb, she asked softly. I opened my mouth. And before I could answer, the background voices rose. My mother's words came sharp. Tell him I'm ashamed of him on this day of all days. Then Dad. Loud enough to rattle through the speakers. It's just a few bills. What kind of man is petty about money? I felt my throat tighten. But I said nothing. Silence was my shield. Ruth tried to hold the phone steady. But more faces crowded in. Lydia pushed forward. Arms folded. Lips curled. He even picked up the call. Mom's been crying all day. Does he care at all? Her words sliced sharper than the rest. But I stayed still. And then out of nowhere, another figure stepped into the frame. A young man in a dark suit. Tie slightly loosened. Face familiar but out of context. His voice was hesitant but clear. Hey, boss. The room behind Ruth went dead silent. I froze, gripping the phone tighter. The recognition hit me. Ethan Clark. New hire at Everline Systems. We'd exchanged emails. I'd approved his reports. But I never connected him with Lydia. And now, in front of the whole family, the truth slipped out. A whisper rippled through the kitchen. Boss, one of the relatives repeated. Another voice murmured. Does that mean Caleb is his boss? Ethan straightened his back, looked around at the crowd, then spoke again, louder this time. No hesitation. Yes, I work at Everline. Caleb is one of the co-founders. The words cut the air clean in two. Plates stopped clinking. Voices died mid-sentence. All eyes turned toward Lydia, whose face drained pale. I didn't smirk, didn't gloat. I simply pressed my lips into a faint line and gave the smallest nod. Hope your big introduction goes perfectly, I said, my voice steady. Then I ended the call. The silence that followed in my living room was absolute. My phone screen went black, reflecting only my own face, calm. Finally calm. I learned later from Ruth what happened after. The kitchen fell into whispers. Then arguments. Lydia stormed out in tears. Ethan standing awkwardly behind. Dad tried to smooth it over, telling people it wasn't as big a deal as it looked. But the damage was done. The pride. The facade. The neat family story. They cracked in one clean instant. For years, I had been invisible. The one at the edge of every photo. The footnote in every conversation. That night, in a single slip of the tongue, my existence was undeniable. Not as the shame, not as the afterthought, as the one who carried weight. That was the climax. The night everything turned inside out. They thought I was silent because I had nothing. They didn't know silence was the sharpest blade I had. The morning after the storm, I woke to an inbox full of noise. Condolences from Ruth. Gossip wrapped as concern from cousins. And buried between them, one email that mattered. Subject line simple: I'm sorry. It was from Ethan. He wrote that he hadn't known Lydia's brother was the same Caleb Morgan signing off on his reports. That he respected me, had admired my discipline at work, and never imagined the family connection would play out like it did. Then he cut straight to it: I'll be ending the relationship. I didn't expect her to treat people that way. Thank you for not putting me on the spot in front of everyone. I leaned back in my chair. The glow from the monitor pale against the Tacoma rain outside. My lips pressed into a quiet smile, not joy, not triumph, just confirmation. Sometimes you don't need to lift a hand. People reveal themselves. An hour later, my phone buzzed with Lydia's name. I let it ring out. Then her message followed. Please talk to him. Tell Ethan to come back. I'll change. Just this once? I stared at the words, thumb hovering, then typed slowly. Hudson didn't leave because of me. He left because of how you live, how you treat people, how you assume everything bends to you. That's not mine to fix. I hit send. No hesitation. What I didn't tell her was that my weapon had never been the canceled payments alone. It was the ledger I had quietly built 24 months of receipts. Jomeyen. Babai Sisharar. Shirtsi. Each line a record of silence swallowed. It sat in a folder on my desktop, neat and undeniable. If the family ever decided to rewrite history, I had the proof. 2 weeks later, the proof wasn't needed. My parents showed up in Tacoma, suitcases in hand, apologies spilling from their mouths like coins. But behind the softness came the asked $2. 000 a month. Just a little support. I listened. I didn't raise my voice. Then I set my own terms. If Lydia matched it, I would too. If not, a legal agreement ensuring their house would pass to me. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Dad's face flushed red. His hand slammed the table. You're setting conditions for your parents. I stood, steady as ever. I think you should leave my house. That night, when the door shut behind them, I knew it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something else. They thought they had stripped me down, but all they had done was hand me the one weapon they never expected: self-respect. Backed by proof. And proof, I knew, lasts longer than any apology. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe. This story isn't over. What my parents and sister lost that night wasn't just money. It was the last claim they thought they had on me. And what I gained wasn't revenge alone, but the kind of freedom that makes people dangerous to control. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sharpest blade. Stay close, because the next chapter is already forming, and you'll want to see just how far the truth can cut.